thank you all for joining us to share the recent exhibition of works by Marguerite Robichaux. And thank you to her dear friend and traveling companion, Liz Peavey, for being with us. 10 years ago, we published glorious, slow-going main stories of art, adventure, and friendship. The Art of Marguerite Robichaux with essays by Elizabeth Peavey. Then as now, I was reminded of Brother Thomas's words. The most enduring gift is the gift of friendship. Such a blessing only a divine reality could create. Over the 5+ decades of the gallery's existence, we have come to most appreciate the connections and network of friendships that art has generated. With Marguerite and Liz, we honor and rejoice in their friendship and how it has added energy to the art that Marguerite has created. We first learned of Marguerite's work when we were doing an appraisal for a local law firm. They, with the help of Louis Cabot, had fashioned a very fine collection of art for their offices. David Winkler, who worked with us at the time, suggested that we consider Marguerite's art for the gallery, and thus began our relationship with her art and with her. The added ingredient has been the connection of her work with the ceramics of Randy Johnston, simply happenstance. This now is the 5th time that we have exhibited the two in partnership. From the outset, it seemed a fortunate coming together, and so it remains. Whatever Marguerite creates, it feels virtually as if Randy had previewed his art and vice versa. Each one's art enhances the experience of the others. Today, we're going to focus on the sense of place as it relates to Marguerite's art. And if we can begin with another quote from Thomas, there are things within us that find resonance with things outside of us. And now I'd like to ask Marguerite to, whoops, I fell down, I got you back, to share with us the introduction so beautifully written for the catalog, but to paraphrase it for you now. Marguerite, please.
Sure, Bernie, thank you very much. And it's always a pleasure to be involved in Pucker Gallery and the exhibition with Randy. I have to admit that sometimes I see previews of his work during the year before I finish mine. So that sometimes helps. But I just want to say that this body of work that's up now was done entirely during the pandemic. While I isolated in my home in the woods of Maine, like people were doing all over the world, isolating in their homes. When it came time to write my artist statement for the catalog, I contemplated mentioning the pandemic. I even asked Liz what she thought about it. And the more I thought about it, and then once I started to write my statement, of course I had to mention the pandemic. It was all encompassing for the last nearly 2 years. And it really defined this body of work of mine because it was all the images are out of my kitchen window, at the end of my road, along the road that I take my walks on. All things that are very familiar to me that I've often painted before, but seen in a new light because I was just there with it for 2 years. I live alone, I work alone, so that the isolation I don't think was as detrimental to me as it was to some people who are a lot more social maybe than I am. I went out maybe once a week to the little town nearest me, to the dump and the post office and the grocery store. I went in no one else's home. The only person in my home was Walter, my significant other. I didn't go to museums or art galleries or restaurants. So I worked and contemplated my surroundings, lived in them. I was at the end of the nearly 2 years so very fortunate and grateful for the gift of having being wrapped in the familiarity of my home and the land around me. It really eased my years, even though I mourned all the lives lost, all the livelihoods ruined, uh, friends that I was not able to bid farewell to. I, we all did that. I just hope that the paintings I made during these past 2 years might help us heal a little bit and make the important statement that art is so important to our lives, especially in times like these.
That's a very wonderful and I think helpful reflection on your own journey, and also to share it with others is incredibly helpful and meaningful. It has been an enormously demanding time for so many. Also, I think a lot of it has been framed by CNN, by news resources. So the nature of the experience, because of communication, has also been multiplied or amplified in a way. And so as much as we're isolated, we're also influenced by the superimposed definition of what the COVID represented for so many people. And at the same time, in that we couldn't be with people, that became a substitute for the experience of other people. And I think that for me, reminded me very much of how important friendship is. And I mentioned at the very beginning, and wanted Liz at least to share a bit of the rather extraordinary friendship that the two of you have shared for so many years, and then been able, through the book and through your just very being, to share that again with us. So Liz, if you don't mind, I'd love to hear it.
Don't mind. What an honor, and thank you for having me today. And so good to see you, Bernie, and to meet you, Rose, and to see my pal. Here we are across 3 time zones. We're having this remote wonderful event together, but feeling like we're all in one room, which is one of the benefits. I know everybody has Zoom fatigue, but it is it's a miracle to be able to bring us all together here. I was listening to Marguerite reflect on her 2 years and her astute way of wrapping up how she imbued herself in her environment. And one of the things that I had been thinking about during the pandemic, and Bernie, you note how we were saturated with the media, was people reporting, oh, I finally noticed the view out of my window, or, oh, there are birds in my yard, or, oh, I hear the sound of the wind now. And one of the greatest benefits of my friendship with Marguerite is that we share that ability that is native to our friendship. It's just as common for us to spend an afternoon and barely speak to each other. My favorite place on this planet is at her kitchen island, looking out those windows that she paints from, watching whatever's happening out there, a bird landing on the feeder, or the ice going down the river, or the light changing on the mountains. And we have an ability to silently communicate to each other. We see the same things. We may not see them in the same way, but we notice. And I think for me, aside from the love that I feel for my friend, what a rare thing to have someone that looks at the world and sees it in a similar way. Not to mention the fact that she makes the meanest martini this side or that side of the Mississippi. She's a fabulous cook. She is funny, charming, and graceful. And she puts up with me. I am her, little yappy dog to her, big, elegant self. So she has been very gracious in putting up with. I always say when we go out into the woods, she's sort of, she's at once elegant and yet, so wood savvy. And I'm, even though I'm a Maine native, I'm like Woody Allen in the woods. Something's going to eat us, something's going to kill us. I'm like always like this, and she's laissez les bon temps. It's like, everything's going to be fine. So she counters, you know, the yin and yang of our friendship, and it has been a miracle. I met her because an editor at Down East Magazine, where I freelanced, thought the two of us should meet each other. So he assigned me to do a story on her house that she had built in the woods of Maine. And she opened the door, and, you know, here we are 25 years later, dearest, loveliest friends. So.
What a
And
wonderful.
Well, I'm just going to say, and for me, you know, Marguerite is much more content on her own. I am a writer. I am perfectly happy being by myself and have spent my career by myself too. But I'm a Gemini, and I need the other half to keep this half sane. And not being able to go up and sit on that deck with her or get in a car and drive around was a real hardship for me. And we're going to make up for lost time.
Now I have to comment on the yang of the yin and yang. I mean, Liz paints me as being the strong one in this, but she doesn't mention the fact that she would have to wait for me at the top of a hike as I mumbled my way up, or that she had to get a snake out of the canoe while I stood screaming on the shore because I didn't want anything to do with it. Yeah, we both contribute strongly to our adventures, and what we see and paint and write about is very much enhanced by doing it together.
I think there's no question, at least in my experience with the gallery, when people come together, as you have, with the sense of both respect and affection, wonderful things happen. And they happen in a way that they wouldn't happen singularly, that you energize one another and support one another. But more than that, I've watched it in the relationship with Samuel Bach, the painter, and Larry Langer, the writer. And that each time Sam finishes a body of work, Larry comes over and responds to it. And then Sam's work the next time gets better. Mm-hmm. And that kind of energy, synergy of talent and kindness, I think ultimately, and respect, has been an absolute joy for me just to be a witness to. Brother Thomas had Jeff Dunn, the physician who was his friend, not his personal physician. And through their conversations, both of them grew. The notion that art can be an opportunity for that kind of growth is really, really very, very meaningful. And I think is some of the energy that goes into the creation of the art itself, whether it's writing, singing, dancing, or painting. So I think our intention, Rose, is to look at some journey around home and some images, and then have Marguerite comment. Liz, I certainly will not hold back. This is a 1 o'clock WebinART in Boston in any event, so it's a little early for martinis. So we'll just have to assume that you can pretend like you've just had one. Do you want? Well, let's back up to the two of them for 1 second and talk about some of your journeys around glorious slow going.
Well, the one of Liz, we were packing the car, Liz, I think, to go on our fall camping trip. It must be
because that's Walter's car. Yes,
that's Walter's car, because we decided we needed to go camping one last time, and we got out to the beach on Flagstaff Lake where we were going to camp, and there wasn't much dry ground, and it was very cold, and there were hunters kind of driving around checking out things with their shotguns across their legs.
Or in my mind, they were axe murderers.
Right.
Again, just point in. Imagine.
We actually cheated and ended up taking everything out of the back of that big vehicle and putting our sleeping bags in there and sleeping in the vehicle overnight. So that was cheating. Now the picture on the right of me, you can't see the martini in my hand, but I'm sitting on my deck with my binoculars looking at birds with the martini in my hand.
I can certainly see the martini.
Oh,
it looks terrific.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
That's absolutely wonderful.
The martini outside when it's cold, the martini stays cold.
And we over the years have become very adept at one-handed binocular holding. Because heaven forbid we put our drink down if we see ruby-throated hummingbird.
That's very wonderful.
Now,
Now,
my friends and my cousins in Texas and Florida are always amazed what we're doing in cold weather in Maine. I mean, they're just appalled that we go stay in a yurt in the middle of the winter or camp out in August. I mean, in October. So I have to reassure them by phone that everything is safe. We're warm. We'll be fine. We'll be home in a few days.
And my favorite line, her Uncle Eb would used to say when she would describe the weather or plowing her driveway or doing one of these adventures, what would he say to you?
Honey, just come home.
quite lovely, but it seems to me
Meaning
between the
come home to
binoculars,
Louisiana.
that's for sure. But seeing the binoculars and then seeing that you carry the martini with you is for inner warmth. You're going to be safe anywhere.
That's right.
Now we can move on to the painting, because I think that the friendship that you share really nourishes the opportunity for these works to be born and all that you've done in the years that we've worked together. So Margaret, if you would, I would appreciate you sort of talking about this really quite glorious work.
This is a painted maple tree that is right off of my deck on the far side of my screen house, which is built on my deck, especially for black fly season in Maine, where if you want to be outside, you're either covered in bug stuff or you're in screening. But this tree starts turning in mid-August, and by late September it is in its full glory. I just, every year, it's one of my very favorite trees. I don't even have to go on the foliage tour. It's right there outside of my kitchen window. It's that color is not necessarily big in my palette. I don't use it a lot, but in spots and in other wider landscapes, I like to use it. But this color just is, you know, it really wanted to dominate this painting.
The notion of this piece and many of the others in the show brings me back to the notion that a guy named Daniel Goldman wrote about, which is attentiveness. And by focusing with such a sense of intensity and at the same time elegance, you allow us to be with you, to experience this moment. And then because it is captured in this way, it endures. So I can come back to it in different days and different times and still be inspired by what you made us or allowed us to be part of. And it really is quite extraordinary.
I often think about when I do these landscapes, they're so familiar to me. I'm not trying to create a landscape, obviously. It's not a tree, it's not mountains and water, but it's more a memory of a tree or a memory of the lake. And that's what I like to remember when I look at these pieces.
That's the issue of both capturing, preserving, and transforming. And so as an artist, hopefully that is in fact what you do. And in this case, you do it so well, it's a joy simply to behold. Right. There's a quote, pardon me, you go ahead.
Oh, no, one of the things that I have noted in Marguerite's work in our book and over the years is that there is a very deep seeing of an image, so that when she paints a snowscape, you can feel the land underneath it. When you look at a tree like this, you can see it leafless. You can see it with the first buds opening. You can almost feel its entire evolution that she has witnessed so slowly. And this is the thing that we talk about when we're looking at work, looking at nature and then creating work out of it, is that it's not, as she just said, she's not creating a landscape. She's encompassing a landscape. And Bernie, the word that we use is the preservation of it. And I always, when I look at one of her paintings, I see the four seasons. I see her depth of experience with whatever it is that she's looking at, not just, isn't that a pretty tree?
Absolutely. There's this quote that I wanted to share the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant, Einstein once said. And then he added, we have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. And I would say that the gift here responds very much to the intuitive capacity to capture, preserve, and then allow us to re-engage with it at different times and in different ways. Next image, please.
The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. Albert Einstein once said, we have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift.
And I love the next image in so many ways. Marguerite obviously mentioned Flagstaff, but if you want to share both what it is and then how it is part of your world.
My home is on the headwaters of Flagstaff Lake, which is actually a reservoir. It's a 27-mile long reservoir in the western part of the state of Maine that is the headwaters of the Kennebec river system. So the river is, the river flows into the lake. The lake is a mile from my house. We spend a lot of time on the water, canoeing, boating, fishing, looking at it. And it's a beautiful landscape. It is, because the lake is a reservoir, the water is taken down in late summer and early fall, so that the runoff in the spring won't flood the area. So therefore, there are a lot of mud flats, and that, I think, has kept a lot of development from happening along the edge of the lake with summer homes or weekend homes. So it's pretty, you go out on the lake sometimes in the middle of July and you might see another couple of boats. It's nice and quiet. This particular piece is an etching. And then I hand colored it after the etching was pulled. If you know about etchings, it's done on a copper plate with a mask of a kind of a wax surface that you draw through with a sharp pointed instrument. Put the plate in acid. The acid eats into the copper where you've drawn away the wax. Then when you take the wax off and ink the plate and run it through the press, you get all the black lines. So you get a black and white image that, of course, is a reverse image from what you're actually is on the plate. So if you want something in a certain position, you have to think of it as a mirror, as an opposite image. And there are ways to put color on an etching, but I chose to hand color it, which makes each one a little bit different from the others.
And it has the nice combination of the graphic quality that etching allows you, and at the same time, the freshness and spontaneity of the watercolor.
Right,
so
right.
The translucence of the watercolor does enhance, in fact, the image itself. And the mountain in the background
is part of the Bigelow Range. That one is probably one of the horns. It's I've embellished it. I kind of made it up too. So
And I would like to just when I look at this picture of the lake, the image that comes to mind is Marguerite and Walter and her friend Alex and I climbing in Walter's dory, taking it up into the middle of the lake. Marguerite opens up the ice chest and produces these little teeny tiny mason jars that each have their individual martini in them with an olive that have been sitting in ice. And we sit and float in the middle of this, sipping our little teeny tiny martinis there.
So this is, I would assume, your version of paradise.
It, my, you look for yourself.
There's a brief video that we can look at next, if that's all right. Wonderful. Thank you, Rose. And Marguerite, if you want to describe what we're looking at, that'd be great.
This is the river right off of my deck that this is ice out. Actually, we had 2 ice outs in 2020. One was in December when we had a December thaw. And then we had another one in the spring. And what happens for those who don't live in the Northeast is that the river freezes in the wintertime, sometimes a foot or 2 of ice on the river and the lake. And then in the spring, when the ice starts to melt, when the snow melts and we get rains, the water rises up and lifts the ice and breaks it into pieces, and then it flows down the river. And sometimes it jams up and causes backup flooding, or it takes it a while to go over a dam, but it's quite dramatic. It's loud because all those ice chunks are chunking together, and it's quite spectacular to see an ice out.
It looks amazing. And it also seems from the image that's here that, again, nature calls you, makes you attentive to it. And then, as I think Liz indicated, you capture it in a way that enables us to be present for it.
Mm-hmm.
So in this particular piece, Winter Morning, and your thoughts about it.
This is the view from my kitchen window. I see it every day in all seasons. One of the things about the pandemic was I spent 2 years straight at my home in the woods of Maine. Normally, I would come to Louisiana for part of the winter and the spring. But because I was there for 2 years straight, I really experienced the changing of each season, from seeing it this way to seeing it in the spring with that frothy green that gets with the new growth, to seeing it in summer when it is dense green, to seeing it in the fall, like we just saw in the Flagstaff piece with fall color. It's so peaceful to me to see this and see it every day, that it's just familiar. And I mean, I could paint this over and over again.
Can you
And
talk
this-
a bit about the nature of it, both as a painting and as an abstraction, and at the same time, that which is anchored in the nature that's around you?
I'm very much, my first job after I graduated from graduate school was as a technical illustrator. So I'm very much attuned to drawing. And I like the use of those branches in the foreground, across the surface, to carry the eye across the painting. Or that's actually wild dogwood. That's the reddish color in the middle ground, to direct the eye there. And it's using those tools, those aesthetic tools, to make the painting move your eye across the painting.
And what I love is this is so familiar to me because, as I said, Marguerite is a fabulous cook. So I am usually on dish duty, and I will get up and walk in the morning and then come back, and we will have saved the stemware from the night before. So I will stand at this window and be able to gaze out. And if she does the glassware while I'm gone, I get incensed, because this is my favorite view is from her kitchen sink. And what you're not seeing to the right is maybe a foot or 2 of snow on her deck, with one teeny tiny path shoveled over to her bird feeder.
Which is wonderful. The next 2 photographs certainly document the amount of snow, it seems to me.
Yes. The one on the left is the road into my home, and that was on Thanksgiving morning of 2019. Walter and I had dinner with friends in Kingfield, Maine, which was about 40 minutes from my home, the night before when this storm started, and we got stuck at their home and spent the night with them. The next morning when their driveway was finally open, we were able to get out, and by the time Walter dropped me off, my road had not yet been plowed, so I had to walk in and shake the trees off as I went. I plowed my own road for 20 years, and then one real heavy snow winter, I kept getting stuck. The game warden would have to come pull me out with chains, and I thought, you know what? I'm too old for this.
Right.
So, and the other photo is just where the snowbank got pushed, but that's by the side of my house. This was probably like in March after a March storm. And I'm sure I'm on the phone talking to cousin Amelia in Texas, trying to tell her what this was. So
Remarkable. But it also calls to mind that nature does play a role in managing our life.
Very much. I mean, nature it's a big part of every day. I've said before, it can be beautiful and embracing and comfortable, and it can also be terrible. It can be violent, and you have to pay attention to what it's doing if you're going to go out, if you've got to go anywhere. Now, Liz says there's no bad weather, there's just bad clothing, but there's some weather that stops me.
I'm just in awe of it. I mean, I remember the 1978 snowstorm here in Boston, where everything was shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And we literally walked from our home in Brookline to the gallery to Newbury Street. No cars could pass, no trains or subways were available. It was glorious, but it was a one-time event. So you could sort of sit back and say, wow, I experienced it. I'm going to put it in my memory bank and hope it doesn't occur again in the same way. But it also provided, and I think in a strange way, COVID has as well, an opportunity for us to step back or to be forced to step back and to evaluate that which is important, that which informs our lives, that which nourishes us and others. And both, I mean, in a certain sense, are sobering. And I think if we can manage it, could also be enriching. I love the next piece, if we could look at it, because on a few bike trips many years ago, actually in New England, to see the mist rising is so spectacular. I always stand in awe of whoever is managing the ship of nature to have this happen. And then for you to have captured it so beautifully in this image is amazing.
This painting was the hardest one that I struggled over the most in this whole series. It was like clawing into my soul to get this painting right. I don't use opaque white paint. The white you see is the gessoed linen, and I often put paint down like on the mountain in the background, and then wipe it away so that it brings some of that white of the surface through to give it a transparency. I like the painting now that it's done, but it was a tough one to do.
That's rather amazing. Liz, you have this wonderful quote. If you'd share it with us, it would be lovely. And then any other comments?
The quote is, "It's a gift to have a painter for a friend, but especially for a writer. What we're doing on our travels, besides having fun, is harvesting impressions and ideas. Marguerite and I speak the same language. We both know how to go slow and see." And this echoes a little bit what we were talking about before, that with being with Marguerite over these years, we have developed a silence as opposed to developing a language. We've developed a comfortable silence with each other, and we can be in the truck, be in the car, wherever we're traveling, and not speak for however long. And then we'll both at the same time remark at the light cutting across a river, or a shadow, or a tree, or we will have seen it at the same time. And we almost don't even have to mention it to each other, that we know that we both noticed something. And I always at one point wanted to make a business card, Elizabeth Peavey, professional noticer, because having so much time with Marguerite out in the woods, out in the wild, stomping around, being on back roads, being able to see my home state. It took a Louisiana native to really show me the palette of my state, the umbers and the siennas and that cerulean blue. I didn't know them before. I grew up in the ocean, and that was my palette. But she has given me inland Maine in a kaleidoscope of colors that now, when someone would look at a landscape this time of year, November and December, before the snow comes, and all they see is monochrome, I see these colors coming out at me that she's given me. So what we have been able to share with each other and give to each other has been beyond friendship. It really has opened my eyes up as a human on this earth.
It's an enormous gift that you have been given, but you also were open to it. And I think that really is a lesson for all of us. The capacity not only to really see or to hear, but to be attuned to integrating both the sounds, the smells, the colors of the experience, and that you were open enough to allow that to enrich your life. Seems to me that's the true gift of friendship and of art, that Marguerite and your relationship and the art itself is about. So it's, for me, it's just an absolute joy to be observant, I guess, one might say, in this situation. And then to make sure that others who see the work have an opportunity to be invited into that experience in such a wonderful way. This is a perfect example, it seems to me, of attentiveness, of enabling us to see so specifically the absolute beauty that nature provides us with, in this case, in autumn. And Marguerite, it's a lovely piece. And if you want to talk about both the background of it as well as the piece itself, I'd love it.
This is a small study. Originally, for the first painting we looked at, the autumn leaves, the big red piece. This was perhaps going to be the guide for that bigger piece. But when I started on that red piece, it just needed to be all red. But this, to me, was a way to kind of explore the palette of this. And I had done years ago some paintings where I used a border around the painting that was actually, I sort of hand printed with an old piece of lace that I would ink and then press into the canvas. And it was almost like making a mat around a watercolor, but it sort of incorporated itself into the piece itself, into the image of the landscape itself. And I was experimenting with it on this in the design of the piece, but I think it kind of wraps up the landscape in a graphic way, a graphic edge around it, that makes it almost like a finished piece, even though it is a study.
And you know what, Bernie, you were saying before, it just striking me going through these images again, you talked about Marguerite's work inviting people into her world. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts of being a party to watching these. You look at one of her paintings and you really are just immediately drawn into that natural world. You can almost, like in those snowscapes, feel the weight of the snow. You can almost smell the snow. I mean, with this, you can almost hear the wind. I feel there's so much animation in the way that she captures a landscape, that it just completely brings everybody right into them immediately.
I agree. I think, Marguerite, the background texture of this around the image itself
Mhm.
creates a kind of fabric or network that keeps your eye focused on the image in the center,
Mhm.
but at the same time is not distracting. It really is as if you, what you said before, created a mat, but it's an interactive mat.
Mhm.
It isn't a passive one. So there's the web of nature in a certain sense is captured in the background, and then the image itself alerts you to those things that you want us to see. I think it's a quite extraordinary piece. And as you said, it's very small, hence the study, but it has the capacity for work much, much larger. Very beautiful. Next image.
My studio.
Yes. Right.
Um, you can see some of the paintings on the wall on the left image that are in the show that were in progress, works in progress. My studio has 30 foot height to it, great light, concrete floors. I use a lot of Q-tips. That's why I took this photo of the floor of my studio, because I take paint away. Like I said, I use the white of the gessoed linen as my white, so that I'm actually painting around things that I want to stay white. And if I've got a birch branch going through a green background, I'll paint over it and then use the Q-tip to pick up the paint so that the branch is white. And I also employ the drips in my work. It's very important to me that these pieces are, like we said, they are not trees, they're not mountains, they are paintings. And it's kind of a way of preserving the integrity of the material. As you can see, I paint flat on my wall. The linen is stapled to my wall, and I only stretch them on stretcher bars after they're finished. I paint thinly, so it's not like I'm cracking paint, so I can stretch them after they've been painted. And I always leave a white edge around everything, because a lot of tension happens on the edge of a piece. And if you cover that over, if you wrap it around the stretcher bars, if you mat over it, you lose that little piece of tension. It also shows it shows the hand of the artist is what it does. It shows that, I've drawn around the edge. I'm like I said earlier, I'm a good illustrator, and I really have to fight getting something to the point where it is illustrative, where it looks like it's just so tight and finely drafted. I try to be loose with the application of the paint, and that happens when I'm using thin paint and it drips.
And if I might jump in here just for a visual for the audience, she's talking about this studio. My room is about halfway up a loft that overlooks her studio. It's not an enclosed room. So when I say I come in, the entryway is through her studio. So the very first thing I do is look all along the wall. And then I can go up to my room, take my bags up, and then I am aloft and I get to look down. And over the years, I've come in and there's been nothing on the wall. I've come in, there's one, work in graphite. That's the start of a painting. And I have had the pleasure and the honor to be able to watch a show evolve. By the end, when she's frantically painting at the end, getting ready for a show, she sequesters herself, so we don't see it at the end. But that has been one of my great joys, is to have this bird's eye view of being able to look down at this work and watching it develop as I visit.
It has to also be a pleasure for Marguerite to have someone as dear as you are to her to be part of this process and not interfere with her painting, but simply be present for her as a friend.
Well, she's got a great eye. I mean, she'll look at something and know that it's back away from that. It's almost finished. Don't do any more to it. You're going to ruin it. Which is often a problem for artists, especially for me. I live so far away from most of the visual artists in Maine. I don't have artist friends stopping by the studio and critiquing my work in progress. So Liz has really helped me with, like she said, the progression of the work over the course of it being painted.
And
Wonderful.
as she's talked about being an illustrator, I mean, some of the graphite renderings that are understudies for paint, it's like, don't put any paint on it. It's so precious. Don't put any paint. I mean, obviously it ends up into this beautiful painting, but the underbody of so many of these works are art pieces unto themselves. That
Agreed.
whole beauty of pentimento, right? Of the building up of to make the work.
Agreed very much with a lot of artists. In fact, unless they can draw, the rest of it somehow doesn't work. The color is a wonderful add-on in many instances, but the bones of it still needs to be done beautifully. And I think the background and illustration and drawing is so critical to the success of the individual paintings as well.
Mm.
The next one is a favorite of mine in the show. And it really, it's even in many ways, the painting is wonderful, and also just having it on the screen, so it's isolated from anything else, is really quite wonderful. Marguerite?
The view out of my living room window, looking down my leach field, and when the wind starts blowing those leaves off the trees, you want to go out there and just stand in them and be rained upon by these leaves blowing. And I kept thinking, I want to be able to catch the movement, to show movement in this, because it's not static. When the wind blows and the leaves fly off, it's very dynamic. So I played around with, it's a watercolor technique that I use. This is an oil, and I used rubber cement and put it down where all that yellow is, all those individual yellow leaves. And then I painted over it, painted the dark green over it. And then I was able to lift the rubber cement up, which left the white canvas, the white linen underneath, which I could then paint yellow to match the full trees. So I just, it was the fact of just trying to create the dynamic of something moving. A number of years ago, I decided I wanted to paint moving water, and I did series and series of paintings of waterfalls, which lent themselves well to my drips and falling water. But I was trying to figure out a way to make movement in through the air with these blowing leaves.
It has very much for me the sense of nature's fireworks in a quite wonderful way. And even out our window, looking out toward the Charles River, when the leaves begin to move in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so you say, how am I going to capture this in my memory? You've captured it with your painting. It's a rare moment. And again, to remain attuned to these moments, I think, are what is so critical about the art itself. Next image, please.
This is one of my favorite pieces in the show. It's obviously a very stylized piece of snow on the trees, but that's really what they look like when we get a heavy snowstorm. I just, it's to me, it's just such a great image, and the majesty of that tree being covered in the snow. And then of course I've used the drips of actually the green, or dark green, from the boughs underneath to anchor them to the ground. And in the wintertime, up in the woods, when there's snow covered everything, sunrise will just be brilliant. And sunsets are also brilliant. And the only thing interfering with that color is the white and dark of the trees. So that's what I was aiming for in this, just the majesty of those trees and the light that you see in the wintertime up in that far north.
And what astounds me about this, again, Marguerite was talking about that we're looking not at paint, but we're looking at the gessoed linen. And one of my favorite quotes of hers, when I would say, nobody paints snow like you do. She says, I don't paint snow, I paint around it.
Nicely said. Looking at this from this moment, they look like two statuesque Chinese emperors, particularly the ones in the foreground, and they're all gussied out, so to speak. They're all dressed. There's a dignity to the trees themselves, especially the two in the foreground, that is so engaging. It's so impressive, and nature is impressive. But to have this sensation of, wow, isn't that amazing? Next one, please. Right.
I had a lot of entertainment in my isolation. As Liz mentioned, I'm a big birder and feed the birds, and the birds know when the food is out. In fact, my Canada jays, if I'm not up in the kitchen living room area, they'll come around and look in my studio window to see where I am to get fed. These were sketches I did of, I had a group of turkeys who spent a good portion of the winter under my deck and upon my deck. And they would actually, I put out grain for them, and they would actually come and tap with their beaks on the glass door from my living room to the deck to get my attention, to put out feed for them. And it was just a great drawing thing to sit there and watch them. They're so ugly, funny, that they're just charming. I know they can be a nuisance to farmers and gardeners, but they were quite entertaining to me when I was at home and isolated. I watched them, I watched the birds. I was having a little logging done on my property, and my logger logs with two beautiful draft horses. So, I get moose, deer, fox, coyotes. I've even had a pine marten across my property. So it's nature is quite entertaining in that way for me.
And I will say, if a visitor becomes a regular, it gets a name. And it will, she had a solo turkey before this group, Carlos, that would come to visit, and right down to her spider, which is probably my favorite name of all.
Mordred.
So when I have to catch up on all of the creatures around when we have a phone conversation too. What is Mordred doing? And where's Carlos? So.
But I think what the notion really is that these become part of your community.
Oh yes, oh yes. Walter will. I'll tell Walter that I've got a new critter hanging around, and he'll say, "Just don't name it. Don't give it a name."
That's lovely. Next piece, please. Clearly a different time of year.
Yes, it is. This was late summer, just starting to have trees turn. That year we had a pretty good drought late in the year, and that where the water is ponded up right there would have been full lake. It would have been full all across there. This is right along my road where I walk. But it just, I love the mountain in the background, that on a hazy day, it turns that beautiful blue. And as the grass is, as we get into late summer and early fall, the grasses turn that golden color. And then you start getting the spots of the trees turning. It's just watching that landscape change like that. It's a gift. You can see in this piece, especially the edges of the painting where I haven't covered over, where I've actually painted outside the lines, which I think, contributes to the tension in the piece from one side to the other. Or, if you covered that up, it would be pretty static. But you can see where the brush has been, where my hand has been, where you can actually see pencil marks in the actual piece. Because I often do complete graphite drawings before I put any color on a piece, mainly because of the way that I use the light and dark. Where I want light, I don't want much paint on it, or where I want white, I don't want any paint on it. So I have to figure out where those areas are going to be before I start slapping dark paint on the canvas.
But also here you've used the tree on the right and the branches on the left to create a foreground invitation into the space.
Right. It acts as a window into that space.
Perfect. And the last piece we want to share, thank you.
Darkening day, yeah. This is the view from the end of my road, where my mile-long road runs into the highway. I see it every time I go to town, every time I go out of my road. This is a dark nubble on the left and the beginning of the Bigelows on the right. And that little piece of water is Flagstaff Lake. But it was a summer's day that then was clouding over to storm. And it just really darkened everything up, which as I sat there and looked at it, it just got darker and darker. So I started this painting, it wasn't this dark, and I kept working on it, and it got darker and darker. But it works in this piece, I think.
Very much so. You feel very present for the nature's changes, I guess, is the best way to think about it. And to be aware of the fact that you remain so attentive to the world around you, and then extending that into your remarks about the show itself. Namely that this has created a refuge for you, and inside that refuge you've created an invitation for all of us to, I think, be nourished by it. So it's really extraordinary to realize that essentially it's board or canvas and some color, but it's not that at all. My favorite phrase of Thomas's, which I wanted to share, and I think aptly responds to this work, is skill and art are not the same thing. And the only real measure of art is astonishment. And I think to come across each of these pieces individually, and that's what we were trying to do with this, was to enable people to engage with it, and in many instances, simply to be astonished by what you've created. So to both of you and to your friendship, I think we have to say thank you. Again, what a journey, what a friendship. And here's to many more martinis. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernie. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Liz, nice seeing you.
What a wonderful, thank you so much for including me in this. I have to confess, this is the first show I've missed since Marguerite's and my friendship started. And I'm actually like looking at the range of work, and I'm tearing up because I didn't get to see all this work together in the studio. So I may forge my way down there before the show comes down.
I hope you make it. Look forward to it. Thank you all so much. Take care.
Thank you. Yeah.